Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in again for this episode. This episode is going to be an epoxy countertop build and pour. Right now, I'm working on a small 3 foot by 1.5 foot test piece. Something that I can show some of my customers. I tell people about epoxy all the time, and they really don't know what to think when I tell them. And, words cannot describe how beautiful these counters are. So, I'm sick of trying to describe how beautiful they are, and I'd rather just show them. So, this is going to be a test piece that I can carry around with me and show off whenever I feel like it. I've done several epoxy I've done 4 epoxy countertops to date, give or take a few. I do prefer the live edge, which I will show how to do with Bondo. I decided for this one I would try to route a nice profile. Something that I haven't done before. I've done the live edge with the Bondo, and I've done just a basically like a square edge, and that one I did over a existing concrete countertop that a customer of mine did, and he didn't really like it, so I did the epoxy over that. Turned out beautiful. Okay, so I am mixing up the Bondo. It comes in 2 parts. One part is just the main component, and the second part is a hardener. You just want to get a nice, good, even mix on this. Don't mix too much or it will dry on you before you're done using it. And the main technique here is to kind of swipe towards the wood. If you try and pull away, it tends to just pull it right off the wood. And you don't need to be perfect. You just need some highs and lows. And when you come back with the sander, it will sand very nicely, and will give you just enough variance and texture that it will create the illusion of a live edge, even if it doesn't look like one. Also, now that I've said that, I would be interested to see if you could create a live edge that actually looked exactly like a real live edge, and would it look that much better for the amount of effort? That's a good question. Okay, so make sure you do a good job sanding this down. Basically what I do is I try and sand this down to about maybe 1/4 of an inch height off of the wood surface. You want to make sure that you sand it really well, because if you leave a sharp edge and you epoxy over it, it's going to remain a sharp edge or a sharp point. So if somebody drags their finger across there, you're going to feel, a sharp point, and then maybe you feel it's unsafe or whatnot. But so just do a good job and try and get out in all those cracks and crevices and sand it nice and smooth. Go ahead and put the extra effort into that, and just, good prep is always good practice. So just get everything prepped right before you do the epoxy. Also, I would like to warn you, if you've never used the Bondo before, it is highly fumous, and I believe the fumes could potentially be flammable. I believe it is flammable, and you'll tell by the smell. So you do need to use a little bit of precaution, and if you're doing it inside on your existing countertops, which I've done before, just make sure you're getting some decent ventilation, or wear a respirator mask that's rated for that kind of vapor or fume exposure. Once all that's set up, basically you want to do a paint and primer, 2 coats of that. We went with a light, it's kind of like a very light gray, and that's pretty close to the base color of what we're going for. So if you were going for a dark counter, you would want to go with maybe one of the darker colors that you're going to use in your epoxy. That way, if there is any see-through, it won't work against you. It will work in your favor, or it at least won't work against you, put it that way. Sand 220 grit in between coats after it dries. Generally wait several hours in between coats. I'm here in Florida in the sun. This stuff is ready to go within an hour, so that's what I did on this. Now, if you have the opportunity, like I do in this project, I would paint and prime both sides, and maybe like I did on this one, after the epoxy was dried, I actually did a water-based polyacrylic to seal the bottoms. It was going for an outside bar underneath an overhang, so wasn't going to be in direct sunlight exposure, which is good for the epoxy. The epoxy is not rated for heavy UV exposure, but it can handle some, and also it won't be in the direct weather, so it should be suitable for this application. For this epoxy, epoxies come in a 2-part. You want to pour your more liquidy version first. That will make sure that well, let's just say if you poured the thicker, usually the hardener is the thicker, I believe. If you poured that first, then as you're mixing it, you're more than likely to have more of the thicker version sticking to the sides of the container. So basically it's a 2-part mixture. I believe I'm mixing 60 ounces, so I did 30 of each. And basically how you would calculate that is you would measure the square footage of your counters. So let's just say you have 10-footer counter space, linear feet, a 10-foot counter, so it's 10 foot long and 2 foot wide. That would give you 20 square feet, and you would do 3 ounces per square foot each pour. So we do our colors in our first coat, and 24 hours later, I'm making a mess here, don't do that. 24 hours later, we do a second coat, which is just a clear coat wear layer. And if you're wondering where I learned how to do epoxy countertops, I pretty much learned everything from Stone Coat Countertops. You can look them up on YouTube. They're all over the place. Great people. I am not using their product in this video, but I do highly recommend their products. I believe after using this product here, their products are quite a bit better. Basically, you want to mix your epoxies together. Do a good job mixing it, because that's very important for the chemical reaction. Generally, we mix it for several minutes. I believe maybe 3 minutes. And we also added a tint into that mixture. I can't tell you exactly what's in the tint. We also got that from Stone Coat that was left over from a previous kit. Okay, so after some research, apparently the tints are forms of pigment that are suspended. Some of them are suspended in resin. Some of them are suspended into a paste. Regardless, it whatever the mixture is, it's something that is formulated to work with the epoxies. So I would advise against using just a normal paint that you might get off the shelf. I know you can tint them with metallic powders. You can tint with Rust-Oleum paints. And the biggest takeaway from that is to use it sparingly. If you add too much of a percentage of anything to the epoxy, you're basically changing the formula. So you want to retain your maximum hardness and durability. So you only want to use as little as you can get away with. Now, when you're pouring this stuff out, you can use a trowel. This trowel also comes from Stone Coat's kit. You can use a paintbrush. Isn't as good. You're probably better off using a roller. If you use a small roller with the really fine tip that goes on them, basically the same kind you would use for rolling trim and doors when you want a really smooth finish. You can use basically it's like a foam roller. That's what it is. You can spread it out with that pretty well if you don't have a trowel. Basically you just want to get it spread out. You want to break the surface tension with the brush. Pour it out as evenly as you can, as I'm doing here or trying to do, and then just get the surface covered. You know, there's no right or wrong way. Just get the surface covered. So spread the material out. Try to keep it from flowing over the edges at first. You want to usually save that until the end. Also, when you're mixing your epoxy, if you figure on you'll need 60 ounces, you might want to mix 70 ounces because if this is your first time using this stuff, you will be nervous. You will have a little bit of anxiety because basically you don't know what you're doing. You've never done it, so your adrenaline is kind of running when you're doing this stuff. So go ahead and mix up some extra, so that way you don't have to worry about running out of product. That will save you a lot of trouble. Now, with most kits, epoxy kits, or epoxies in general, you usually get up to an hour of working time, give or take a little bit. So while you do need to work efficiently, also you do have plenty of time to kind of work with this stuff. So just make sure you get everything planned out. Put down plenty of plastic. We chose to use a spare bedroom in my parents' home just because the shop, if you have a wood shop, there's going to be so much dust and small particles in the air that they're going to end up embedded all in the surface of your counters. So try and pick a place that is dust free. Maybe even close off the vents for a while to that room if you have any kind of dust floating around, or maybe that could possibly come out of your vents. Now, once you get your top covered and you get all the material spread out, make sure you get the epoxy into every crack and crevice, especially on the live edge. There's a lot of nooks and crannies that you need to get the epoxy into. Just make sure you do that. For this build here, like I mentioned earlier, this was going to be a countertop for a bar outside. So I made sure on the insides I spread the epoxy on the inside edges, and just to protect this thing. I know it's going to be outside, it's going to be receiving humidity and a little bit of weather, so I wanted to get this thing as sealed as I could, and I don't think I wanted to epoxy both sides, but I just don't think that's realistic, so that's why I did the polyacrylic on the other side. So if you don't have your own base tint, you can purchase metallic and non-metallic pigments. It's basically powder. It's the same stuff they use in beauty products for women, like eyeshadow, and they also use it in artists' paints. You can mix some of that up into the epoxy, and that will give you a stable tint to use. Also, you can mix Rust-Oleum paints just a little bit in, and apparently they work fine. I've used Rust-Oleum in all of my epoxy countertops, and I've never had any issues. As a matter of fact, I recommend them. But apparently the pigments for the base tint is probably the better way to go, or if you just purchase a base tint product that's already suspended. Okay, so here, basically the black that you're seeing, I'm using a Rust-Oleum. Actually, I don't even think it's black. I think it's like a dark bronze, or it's pretty close to black. Basically, I just spray that into a cup, and I'm dipping my brush into it, and erratically and unevenly I'm just kind of mixing that around. You want to get about maybe between 60 to 80% of the whole surface covered. Usually when you're doing this stuff, you're thinking about the veins and stuff like that, but if you concentrate too much on just the veins, you're going to have a vast majority of your table or counter that's just has no interest, no variance in color. So what I do is I make sure I hit almost the entire surface, and if I need more color, I just go back and add it. This way, I don't have a busy area and then another area that's just plain that looks not real to me. So I make sure I get probably about 90% of the surface covered up. And if you don't want to, if you want it more white, then just use less black and spread it around, and it ends up being more of a gray or a played down black than it's not like if you needed more pigment, you just add more. So in my opinion, I like more colors, more subtleties. It's the subtlety that really makes it look real to me. So you can use the same method for several colors. If you're going for, I think for this we used a bronze, a silver, a gold, a pearl. So anywhere from grays to light browns in this. And the more you chop your brush around and the more you mix the paints, it kind of just blends them in and makes them look more realistic. The good thing about epoxy is it does a lot of the work for you. So if you can just get it on the surface and manipulate it with a paint stick or a brush, the epoxy does the majority of the work for you. Also, disclaimer, make sure you get plenty of plastic down, because this stuff is messy. It's going to run, it's going to drip. It's basically like syrup all over the place. You can see it on my shirt. It's not very forgiving, but if you take the proper precautions, there's nothing to worry about. I really like the Rust-Oleum metallic spray paints. When you apply them and you look at the counter and at the right angle, you get like you kind of get like a sparkle. Um, like you remember the movie Twilight, when they would go out into the sun, they kind of shimmered like they had glitter all over them. That you kind of get the same effect if you do it right, or even if you don't. Well, basically, what I do is I kind of dust the majority of the surface. You'll see I'm about to do that right now. So you dust the surface, and that kind of just gives you little tints here and there. Just be careful with the overspray. You'll see later if you watch to at the end of the video. I take this stuff out into the sun, and you can really appreciate the beauty of these countertops. I mean, they just shimmer and sparkle and whatever else you can think of. I mean, really amazing stuff. So here I am with the paint sticks, just kind of creating some veins, subtle veins. That's what I'm doing here. I've done veins where I poured them just a little bit out of a cup, and I don't really like that method. So basically, I just spray the paint stick and just drag it through. Lots of little streaks here and there. Now, I will admit, at first, this does not look great. Um, if I didn't know what they look like at the end, I would say at this point, these things look like crap. But it's a process, you know. You work at it a little bit, you manipulate it, you let the epoxy do its thing, because even though you can't tell, it's flowing right now. If I were to speed this up, you would see it moving. You know, it's flowing like a very slow moving river right now. So you let the epoxy do its thing, you come back, you hit it with the heat gun. That'll make it move a little bit if you want a little more movement. If you don't like a spot, you know, touch it with your finger, use a paint stick, do whatever you got to do to manipulate it. You know, if you see anything that looks unnatural or that draws your attention too much, you can change it. Okay, and I just realized at this point I didn't even disclose what this tabletop is made out of. Basically, it's 2 sheets of 3/4 MDF glued and screwed together. If you use 1 layer, it's going to look cheaper. I don't know why, because it's thinner, it just comes off as a cheaper product. If you do 2 layers, it's going to look like a slab of stone. So I highly recommend 2 layers. That'll give you 1.5 inches, give or take, and it'll also be a more stable product because it'll be thicker and less likely to warp. And if you just want to see the end product, by all means, go to the end of the video. I've got about a minute or 2 footage of the finished countertops, and you can just take a look at it there. Really beautiful. Really turned out nice. I believe right now I'm just dusting on some metallic gold. Big fan of that. I'm a big fan of the metallic silver as well. You just can't go wrong with those two. Basically, we're trying to recreate kind of like a Carrara marble, give or take. You may not see too much of the gold or silver in the Carrara, but that's what we like. And so that's what we're going with. I actually add a little bit of teal or turquoise in the sample piece on the back there. Just trying to try out some new things. So in a perfect world, you would spread out your epoxy and go ahead and torch the entire surface. That will release the air bubbles, and you'll see them too as you're torching the surface. You'll see the bubbles pop. You don't want to go too slow, or you'll burn the epoxy. You don't want to go too fast, or you won't pop all the bubbles. But eventually, you do want to torch it at the beginning, and you want to torch it at the end, just to make sure you don't have any bubbles left. Because if you don't torch them out, they will be left in the finished product. Now, this has become my go-to method. I just grab a latex glove and drag it through. You would think it would make a real mess, but what it does is it creates the most subtle veins and streaks that you've ever seen. So basically, I'll just brush the entire surface, and it's something you really can't appreciate until it's done, and you look at it and you can see just, it's not just a busy vein here and at the corner there. There's all kinds of subtle, minute changes that you see in natural stone. You know, when you see the end product, it does look natural, and I believe that is because of the subtle things that we do, like this brush or glove technique. And if you can, get a helper to help you with this stuff. Um, Luckily, I got my dad to help me. He knows what he's doing. We've done almost the same amount. I think I've only done 2 pours without him. So, he's done. This is his third. I think I've done 4 or 5 at this point. So it does help greatly. And kind of just, even if they're just there for moral support, because it's very hectic. Don't ask me why. You feel like you're under the gun when this stuff. As soon as you mix the epoxy, it's like, hold on tight. I mean, it's a real ride. So it's great having a helper. If you don't have anyone to help you, just make sure you prepare. Make a checklist. Check it twice, because once you got the epoxy on your hands, or maybe you got it on your shoes, you don't want to walk through your house. You don't want, it's just prepare. That's all I can tell you. My apologies if this video is a little bit long. I just wanted to show you the important stuff. I could have made it 10 minutes long, but you'd probably have maybe a lot of questions if you were looking for answers in this video. So I wanted to just go ahead and give you all the information I could. And if maybe, if you want the videos to be shorter, just, tell me in the comments down below. Also, if there's anyone else out there that does epoxy countertops, let me know what you use for your base tints and pigments. I'd like to know. For the epoxy counters, once this stuff dries, or I'm sorry, as it's drying, you're supposed to wipe the drips. You'll get drips that happen on the edge. You're supposed to wipe those up maybe once an hour until it's completely dry. We can never manage to do it. Life gets in the way and we get other stuff to do. So we usually end up grinding them off or filing them off. But if you've got the time, or if you have got the care, just go ahead and rub your finger underneath the edge once an hour just to catch the drips, and you'll save yourself a little bit of work at the end. For me, what I like to do is I like to use the paint stick or any stick, and I like to go through the veins many times, giving myself many different subtle veins. I believe, to a point, the more you do, the better. Of course, you can always overdo it, but that's not what I'm doing here. I believe you could overdo it if you use too much pigment, but using it the subtle way that I'm doing it, it just creates more of a complexity that adds to the realness. So basically, once this coat dries, this is basically the design layer, and then we do another 60 ounces 2-part epoxy for just a wear layer. Just goes on clear right over the color layer, and basically what that does, that just protects your work. So you got a wear layer, so if something happens, you might be able to buff that layer, or you could just repair it with a fresh pour on top of that if you had to. So what do you think? Looks amazing, right? Doesn't look anything like what you thought it was looking like, or at least what I thought it looked like. I mean, it looked like crap from the video. Look at it now, though. Truly beautiful. And this is nothing compared to what you see at the end of the video and the light. I mean, just truly fantastic stuff. I mean, it's probably some of the funnest stuff that I do is epoxy stuff. Now, with the edges, depending on what kind of edge you have, you need to brush in the pigments to kind of so basically what you'll have is, we'll just say if you had a rounded over edge and just a straight edge going down, basically your pigments would just run straight down. So in order to combat that, you would come back with your brush and try and make it look a little more random, so it's not just streaks coming down. But that's what's nice about the live edge, is you can let it just run down the live edge, and because it's such a irregular surface, it kind of does all that for you, so no worries there. Well, there it is, guys. The amazing countertop. I mean, it just shimmers in the sun. Now I got a test or a showpiece, the smaller rectangle piece in the back there. Now I don't need to try to come up with words to describe how beautiful this stuff is. I can just show them right on the spot. Got more videos coming out soon. Also, this was part of the cabinet build. I will have that complete video up soon. This was just the epoxy part that I wanted to make a separate video from. If you guys like the video, go ahead and hit the like button and hit subscribe for more videos in the future. And thanks for watching.